Hey guys, I have brought you poison to put you to sleep tonight. Don't be afraid. It is a kind of poison that you will not be able to eat even if you are born again. Every drop of this poison is a single word that if it reaches your ears, you will fall asleep forever for today. No one will be able to wake you up. The world will turn upside down. The Third World War will start. A bomb will explode on the roof of your house. Still, you will not wake up. You will wake up tomorrow morning to the soft singing of birds. Tonight we're starting a journey into one of the strangest chapters in human history. So before we begin, maybe dim the lights, settle into your favorite sleeping position, and get comfortable. Tonight we're traveling back to a time when doctors carried more confidence than evidence, when medicine was often based on theories that sounded convincing but were sometimes spectacularly wrong, and when the cure for your illness could easily be more dangerous than the illness itself. We're going to explore the bizarre world of historical medicine, a world where people swallowed mercury to live longer, where physicians drained blood from already weak patients because they believed it would restore balance, where tobacco smoke was pumped into people's bodies for reasons that somehow made sense at the time, and where some treatments were so extreme that surviving the doctor was occasionally the patient's greatest medical achievement. Now, to be fair to these historical physicians, most of them genuinely wanted to help people. They weren't villains sitting around medieval hospitals thinking, how can I make this situation dramatically worse? At least most of them weren't. The problem was that for most of human history, people had almost no idea what actually caused disease. They couldn't see bacteria. They didn't understand viruses. They had no knowledge of genetics. They knew people got sick, and they knew some people recovered while others didn't. Everything else was mostly educated guessing mixed with tradition, philosophy, religion, and a surprising amount of confidence. And confidence, as history repeatedly demonstrates, can be dangerous when combined with complete ignorance. Tonight we'll meet doctors, patients, kings, emperors, and ordinary people who all trusted medical treatments that now seem almost unbelievable. We'll discover how some of the most respected medical practices lasted for centuries despite causing immense suffering. And we'll see how humanity slowly stumbled toward modern medicine through a very long series of mistakes. So relax, get cozy, and let's begin. Our story starts thousands of years ago, long before modern hospitals, long before laboratories, long before anyone could search their symptoms online and convince themselves they had 17 rare diseases before breakfast. We're traveling to the ancient world. Ancient civilizations actually developed impressive medical knowledge in some areas. The Egyptians could perform basic surgery. The Greeks carefully observed symptoms. The Romans built sanitation systems that improved public health. But despite these achievements, many medical theories rested on assumptions that would shape healthcare for nearly 2,000 years. One of the most influential ideas came from ancient Greece. It was called the theory of the four humors. According to this concept, the human body contained four essential fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health depended on keeping these substances in perfect balance. If one became excessive, illness followed. A fever might mean too much blood. Melancholy could mean excess black bile. Digestive problems might indicate trouble with yellow bile. Everything was connected, at least in theory. The problem was that nobody could actually prove any of this. But once an idea becomes accepted wisdom, evidence often becomes optional. And for centuries, physicians treated patients according to humor theory. The treatment usually involved removing something. If a patient seemed overheated, doctors might remove blood. If someone appeared sluggish, they might prescribe purging. If a person looked unhealthy, the solution often involved making them considerably more uncomfortable. Because if balance was good, then surely removing large quantities of bodily fluids would improve balance even further. That logic somehow survived for generations. One of the most famous examples was bloodletting. Bloodletting became one of the most common medical treatments in history. The process was exactly what it sounds like. Doctors intentionally removed blood from patients, sometimes using knives, sometimes using specialized instruments, sometimes using leeches, and not just a few drops. In severe cases, enormous quantities of blood could be removed. Patients suffering from infections, fevers, headaches, pneumonia, and countless other conditions were routinely bled. Ironically, many of these illnesses already weakened the body. Removing blood often made patients weaker still. But because doctors expected improvement, they frequently interpreted any temporary change as proof the treatment was working. If the patient survived, bloodletting received credit. If the patient died, the illness was blamed. Convenient systems tend to last a long time. Bloodletting became so widespread that it was practically a medical default setting. Feeling sick? Bloodletting. Fever? Bloodletting. Pain? Bloodletting. Not sure what's wrong? Extra bloodletting. It was medicine's equivalent of hitting every problem with the same hammer. And unfortunately, the hammer was attached to a sharp blade. Perhaps the most tragic example involved one of the most famous men in history, George Washington. In December 1799, Washington developed a severe throat infection. His physicians responded using standard medical practice. They repeatedly removed blood. By some estimates, nearly 40% of his total blood volume may have been taken within a short period. Modern doctors reading that sentence usually experience a moment of silent horror. Washington grew weaker and eventually died. Of course, his doctors believed they were helping. They followed respected medical knowledge of their era. But history would eventually judge the treatment far more harshly. Still, bloodletting was only the beginning. If doctors wanted to remove harmful substances from the body, there were many creative ways to do it. One popular option involved powerful laxatives. Patients consumed substances designed to empty their digestive systems as completely as possible. The experience was exactly as pleasant as it sounds. Physicians believed toxins and imbalances could be expelled through aggressive purging. Unfortunately, severe dehydration occasionally followed. Patients who were already sick could become dangerously weakened. Yet the treatment remained popular. After all, something dramatic was happening. And throughout history, dramatic treatments often appeared more convincing than gentle ones. Humans sometimes equate suffering with effectiveness. If it hurts, surely it must be working, right? History repeatedly answered that question with a very firm no. Another favorite remedy involved mercury. Yes, mercury, the shiny metal now associated with warning labels. For centuries, mercury appeared in medicines across Europe, Asia, and beyond. Doctors prescribed it for skin diseases, infections, digestive problems, and numerous other ailments. Perhaps most famously, mercury became a treatment for syphilis. Patients consumed mercury, rub it onto their skin, inhaled mercury vapors, sometimes all three. The side effects were horrifying. Teeth loosened, gums deteriorated, neurological damage occurred. Patients could experience severe pain and weakness. One dark joke from the period claimed that a night with Venus led to a lifetime with Mercury. The joke survived because too many people understood exactly what it meant. And yet doctors continued prescribing it, because sometimes symptoms improved temporarily, or appeared to improve, or people desperately wanted them to improve. Medicine has always faced the challenge of distinguishing real cures from hopeful illusions. And before scientific testing existed, that distinction was incredibly difficult. Mercury remained in medical use far longer than anyone today would find comforting. Unfortunately, history still had stranger treatments waiting, and some of them were even less logical. Now, where were we? Ah, yes. Humanity had already decided that removing blood was a fantastic idea, mercury was somehow medicinal, and purging patients until they could barely stand counted as healthcare. Naturally, things were about to get even stranger. Because history has an incredible ability to look at a bad idea and somehow make it worse. Tonight's chapter begins in Europe during the 17th and 18th centuries, when doctors were searching for new ways to revive the unconscious. This sounds reasonable enough. If someone had stopped breathing, collapsed, or nearly drowned, physicians desperately wanted methods to bring them back. The problem wasn't the goal. The problem was the method. And the method involved tobacco smoke. Specifically, pumping tobacco smoke into people's bodies through the opposite end from where smoke is usually expected to enter. Yes, the tobacco smoke enema. A phrase that sounds less like medicine and more like a punishment invented by an unusually creative villain. The basic theory was that tobacco contained stimulating properties. Doctors knew tobacco could create strong bodily reactions. Therefore, they reasoned that introducing smoke into an unconscious patient might restart bodily functions. Some physicians believed the warmth of the smoke would revive internal organs. Others thought the tobacco itself possessed restorative powers. The details varied. The confidence remained impressive. Along several European rivers, rescue kits were even installed for emergency use. These kits contain equipment specifically designed to administer tobacco smoke enemas to drowning victims. Imagine nearly drowning. Imagine surviving the river. Imagine finally reaching safety, and then discovering what the rescue team planned to do next. History rarely asks for your opinion. To be fair, some drowning victims probably recovered afterward. The trouble was that people sometimes recovered naturally after rescue efforts. Without proper scientific testing, physicians often credited the most dramatic intervention. And few interventions were more memorable than this one. Eventually, the practice faded away. Not because doctors suddenly became embarrassed, although that may have happened too. Instead, better medical understanding gradually replaced it. Thankfully, because some historical traditions deserve retirement. Now let's move from tobacco to something even more unsettling. For centuries, parts of Europe developed a surprising appetite for mummies. Not admiration, consumption. Actual consumption. This practice sounds so bizarre that many people assume it must be exaggerated. Unfortunately, it isn't. During the medieval and early modern periods, powdered mummy became a recognized medicinal ingredient. People believed preserved human remains contained healing properties. The logic emerged from misunderstandings, translation errors, ancient traditions, and wishful thinking. The resulting medicine became known as mumia. Pharmacists sold it. Doctors prescribed it. Patients swallowed it. And somewhere in the distant past, an Egyptian noble who spent enormous resources preparing for eternal rest probably never imagined becoming part of someone's headache treatment. The demand eventually became so large that genuine mummies grew scarce. Whenever demand exceeds supply, human creativity enters the conversation. Not always helpfully. Counterfeit mummy production emerged. Some merchants allegedly created fake medicinal mummies using recently deceased bodies. Because apparently there is always someone willing to start a black market industry if enough money is involved. Patients purchased these remedies believing they contained ancient wisdom. Instead, they often received little more than powdered human remains. Medical benefit remained questionable. The profit margins were considerably clearer. Yet people continued buying them. Because illness creates desperation, and desperate people often accept extraordinary claims, especially when respected authorities endorse them. This pattern appears again and again throughout history. The treatment changes. Human nature remains remarkably consistent. Meanwhile, another deadly substance quietly built a medical reputation: arsenic. Today, arsenic is best known as poison. Historically, however, it occupied a far more complicated position. Small quantities appeared in numerous remedies. Doctors prescribed arsenic-containing medicines for skin conditions, infections, fevers, and various chronic illnesses. Patients sometimes took it regularly. Some even believed it improved appearance, which is certainly one way to approach skincare. The difficulty with arsenic is that the line between medicinal and dangerous can be extremely narrow. Even when doctors administered it carefully, cumulative exposure carried risks: nausea, weakness, organ damage, and sometimes much worse. Yet arsenic survived in medicine for centuries because occasionally it appeared effective. This created a dangerous illusion. People focused on successes. Failures received less attention. The dead rarely published medical reviews. As we move into royal courts, things become particularly fascinating. Because kings and queens had access to the finest physicians money could buy. Unfortunately, expensive mistakes are still mistakes. Royal medicine often combined the best available knowledge with staggering levels of confidence. When rulers became ill, entire teams of physicians assembled. Consultations occurred. Debates erupted. Treatments multiplied. And occasionally the patient found themselves enduring every available remedy simultaneously. One unfortunate monarch might be bled, purged, given mercury, placed on special diets, covered in poultices, and subjected to various experimental therapies, all within a matter of days. The result resembled less a medical treatment plan and more a coordinated attack. No one intended harm. Quite the opposite. Doctors desperately wanted success. Their reputations depended upon it. The problem was that multiple ineffective treatments can become surprisingly dangerous when combined. The patients suffered. The physicians argued. History quietly took notes. Consider the case of European courts during the 17th century. Medicine remained deeply connected to status. Wealthy patients expected active intervention. A doctor who simply recommended rest might appear incompetent. Patients wanted action. Visible action. Dramatic action. And doctors often supplied it. This created a strange incentive structure. Gentle treatments looked unimpressive. Aggressive treatments looked professional. The more elaborate the procedure, the more convinced people became of its value. Modern medicine still occasionally struggles with this perception. People often prefer complicated solutions to simple ones. History suggests caution. Sometimes the boring answer is correct. Speaking of boring answers, one of history's most common medical recommendations was fresh air. Ironically, this simple advice frequently helped more than many elaborate treatments. Not because physicians fully understood germs. They didn't. But because ventilation sometimes reduced exposure to disease. Occasionally doctors accidentally stumbled into useful practices. The challenge was distinguishing lucky successes from mistaken theories. Without controlled studies, everything looked equally convincing. This brings us to another astonishing chapter in medical history. Animal-based remedies. Human beings have swallowed an extraordinary variety of creatures in pursuit of health. Powdered animal parts, ground bones, dried organs, rendered fats, crushed shells, and ingredients that are probably best left undescribed during a relaxing bedtime story. Many treatments originated from symbolic thinking. If an animal possessed strength, perhaps consuming part of it transferred that strength. If a creature demonstrated speed, maybe its characteristics could be borrowed. Logic operated differently before modern biology arrived. People sought patterns, meaning, connections. Sometimes those connections existed only in imagination. One physician might prescribe powdered stag antlers. Another recommended preparations made from unusual reptiles. Yet another suggested ingredients so exotic that obtaining them became more challenging than surviving the illness. Patients obediently followed instructions. After all, doctors were experts, at least according to everyone involved. Medicine frequently advances through an uncomfortable process. People become convinced they understand something. Evidence arrives. The evidence disagrees. Then follows a long period during which many refuse to accept it. Historical medicine offers countless examples, and perhaps none illustrates this better than continuing devotion to bloodletting. Even as doubts emerged, many physicians defended the practice fiercely. Generations had used it. Respected authorities endorsed it. Medical textbooks recommended it. Abandoning bloodletting required admitting that centuries of experts might have been mistaken. That is never an easy conversation, especially when your career depends upon those experts being right. Yet evidence gradually accumulated. Some doctors noticed patients often recovered better without excessive intervention. Others observed that aggressive treatments sometimes worsened outcomes. Slowly, painfully slowly, medical thinking began to change. Not overnight, not even over decades. But eventually the foundations shifted. And with that shift came one of the most important realizations in human history. Good intentions are not enough. A treatment must actually work. Which sounds obvious now. Yet for thousands of years, medicine largely relied upon tradition, authority, and theory. Scientific testing would transform everything. But before that transformation arrived, history still had some remarkably dangerous ideas left to explore, including radioactive medicines, miracle tonics, and health products that accidentally poisoned thousands of enthusiastic customers. But those stories will have to wait until the next chapter. For now, let the strange physicians, anxious patients, powdered mummies, tobacco smoke machines, and royal medical disasters slowly drift into the distance. The candles are burning low. The apothecary shelves are finally growing quiet. And somewhere in history, a doctor is still confidently prescribing something that future generations will find absolutely unbelievable, which, as it turns out, is one of the most reliable traditions in medicine, so settle back in. Get comfortable. Maybe adjust your blanket one more time. Tonight we're continuing our tour through the wonderfully confusing history of medicine, a field that spent thousands of years doing its absolute best with information that was, in hindsight, occasionally spectacularly wrong. Last time, we left behind tobacco smoke enemas, powdered mummies, arsenic remedies, and enough bloodletting to make modern physicians quietly stare at the ceiling. Unfortunately, history wasn't finished. Not even close. Because the 20th century was about to arrive. And with it came one of the most exciting scientific discoveries humanity had ever seen. Radioactivity. Now, from our modern perspective, hearing the words radioactive medicine tends to trigger immediate concern. Most people instinctively think, "No, thank you." And that is generally a wise response. But when radioactivity was first discovered, many people viewed it very differently. It seemed miraculous, mysterious, powerful, almost magical. Scientists were uncovering invisible forces hidden inside matter itself. Newspapers reported astonishing discoveries. The public became fascinated. Investors became excited. Entrepreneurs became extremely excited. And whenever entrepreneurs become extremely excited, strange products usually follow. Within a surprisingly short period, radioactive substances began appearing in commercial goods. Radioactive toothpaste, radioactive cosmetics, radioactive chocolate, radioactive heating pads, radioactive beauty treatments, radioactive drinking water. Because apparently the collective reaction to discovering invisible energy was, what if we put it in everything? The most famous example involved radium. Discovered by Marie Curie and Pierre Curie, radium genuinely was a remarkable scientific discovery. Unfortunately, scientific discoveries and commercial marketing do not always make ideal companions. Businesses quickly realized that people associated radium with vitality and modernity. Soon, companies began selling products that promised renewed energy, improved health, enhanced strength, and longer life. Evidence remained somewhat limited. Advertising remained abundant. One product became particularly famous. It was called Radithor. Radithor consisted of distilled water containing radioactive elements. The manufacturer marketed it as a health tonic. Customers drank it willingly, some even enthusiastically. After all, this was the future. Science was transforming the world. Electricity was spreading everywhere. Airplanes crossed continents. Technology seemed capable of anything. Why shouldn't radioactive water improve health? As it turned out, there was one rather significant reason. Radiation can damage living tissue, a detail that will become increasingly important. One of Radithor's most enthusiastic customers was a wealthy American businessman named Eben Byers. Byers became convinced the product improved his well-being. He drank bottle after bottle, month after month, year after year. At first, he reportedly felt energetic. Perhaps it was placebo, perhaps coincidence, perhaps something else entirely. Whatever the cause, he continued consuming astonishing quantities. Then the consequences arrived. Slowly, relentlessly, the radiation began damaging his body. His health deteriorated. His bones weakened. His jaw suffered severe destruction. By the time doctors understood the extent of the damage, it was too late. Byers died in 1932. His case became one of the most famous examples of radioactive medicine gone terribly wrong. Investigators later examined his remains. Even after death, they remained dangerously radioactive, which is not generally considered an indicator of excellent health. The tragedy helped change public attitudes. Suddenly, radioactive miracle cures looked less miraculous. Regulators became more interested. Manufacturers became more cautious. Consumers became considerably less enthusiastic about drinking radioactive substances. A reasonable outcome, all things considered. But while radioactive tonics were causing problems, another category of medicine was flourishing. Patent medicines. If you lived during the 19th century, patent medicines were everywhere. Newspapers advertised them. Traveling salesmen promoted them. Store shelves overflowed with them. Their labels promised astonishing results. Cures for headaches. Cures for fatigue. Cures for digestive disorders. Cures for nervousness. Cures for aging. Cures for practically everything except poor decision-making. And perhaps most impressively, many manufacturers never bothered proving their claims, because in many places they didn't have to. Medical regulation remained weak. Advertising remained creative. The combination proved profitable. A bottle might contain alcohol, or morphine, or cocaine, or all sorts of ingredients that consumers knew little about. The labels often emphasized exotic formulas and secret recipes. The actual contents sometimes resembled a chemistry experiment conducted during a thunderstorm. One popular category involved alcohol-heavy tonics. Patients drank them and reported feeling better. This wasn't entirely surprising. Alcohol tends to influence mood. Unfortunately, it doesn't cure tuberculosis, nor most of the other diseases these products claim to treat. Still, customers often return for more. The temporary relief felt genuine. The medical benefit remained considerably less certain. Some patent medicines contained opium-derived substances. Again, consumers often experienced immediate effects. Pain decreased. Anxiety lessened. Sleep improved. People naturally assumed the medicine worked. The problem emerged later. Dependency, addiction, and countless unintended consequences followed. Entire families sometimes used these products without understanding what they contained. Children received doses. Adults consumed them regularly. Doctors occasionally recommended them. Manufacturers collected profits. History collected cautionary tales. One of the strangest trends involved beauty treatments. Throughout history, people have risked extraordinary dangers in pursuit of appearance. Medical history contains countless examples. Victorian society was no exception. Certain beauty products included arsenic. Small amounts were marketed as complexion enhancers. The theory suggested that arsenic could create pale, fashionable skin. Because apparently nature had already provided countless safer options, and society collectively decided those were insufficiently dramatic. Users consumed arsenic tablets or powders hoping for cosmetic improvement. Some reported positive results. Others experienced symptoms consistent with poisoning. As always, the problem involved dosage. A little could appear harmless. More could become dangerous. The line between beauty treatment and medical emergency remained alarmingly thin, yet demand persisted. Fashion has rarely been known for excessive caution. Medical misunderstandings also influenced child care. Parents desperately wanted healthy children. Doctors desperately wanted effective treatments. Unfortunately, desperation and limited knowledge sometimes created disastrous combinations. Many childhood remedies contained ingredients modern parents would reject immediately. Mercury compounds appeared in certain treatments. Alcohol appeared in others. Opium-based medicines occasionally soothed restless infants. And while the children certainly became quieter, the method carried obvious risks. Some products achieved popularity precisely because they worked. The issue was understanding what worked actually meant. A sleeping child is not necessarily a healthier child. History occasionally learned these lessons the hard way. In fairness, not every historical treatment failed. Some succeeded unexpectedly. Certain herbal remedies contained genuinely useful compounds. Traditional healers sometimes discovered effective treatments through generations of observation. A few ancient practices eventually gained scientific support. The challenge lay in separating valuable knowledge from dangerous assumptions. Without controlled testing, both often appeared equally convincing. A successful recovery could validate almost any treatment. An unsuccessful outcome could be blamed on fate, illness, or bad luck. Determining truth required better methods. And those methods were finally beginning to emerge. Across Europe and North America, scientific medicine slowly gained momentum. Researchers conducted experiments. Hospitals collected data. Laboratories investigated disease. The process was gradual. Mistakes continued, but something fundamental had changed. Increasingly, doctors sought evidence, not merely tradition, not merely authority. Evidence. This shift sounds simple. In reality, it transformed civilization. For thousands of years, medicine had relied heavily on inherited wisdom. Now physicians increasingly demanded proof. Some cherished treatments failed these tests. Others survived. Many disappeared. The transition was neither smooth nor universally welcomed. People become attached to familiar beliefs, especially when those beliefs have existed for generations. Yet evidence continued accumulating, and evidence can be surprisingly stubborn, even when it ruins a perfectly good theory. By the early 20th century, medicine was entering a new era. Bacteria had been identified. Germ theory gained acceptance. Surgical techniques improved. Public health measures expanded. Life expectancy gradually increased. For the first time in history, doctors possessed tools that consistently outperformed hope and tradition. But progress came with its own dangers. Because whenever medicine discovers something powerful, there is always a temptation to overuse it. And in the next chapter, we'll encounter treatments that genuinely worked, at least initially, before creating entirely new problems. Powerful drugs, questionable surgeries, miracle cures that became disasters, and doctors who believed they had finally conquered nature. History, as usual, had other plans. So for now, let the glowing radium bottles fade into darkness. Let the patent medicine advertisements curl at the edges like old paper. Let the Victorian pharmacies close their doors for the night and drift peacefully onward as humanity continues its long, strange, occasionally alarming search for better health. A search filled with brilliant discoveries, unfortunate experiments, and enough medical confidence to power civilization for centuries. The candles are burning low. The apothecary shelves are quiet. The bottles of radioactive water have finally been put away, which is probably for the best. And tonight, we're continuing our journey through the strange and sometimes alarming history of medicine. So get comfortable, settle in, and let's return to a world where doctors were slowly learning how the human body actually worked. A process that sounds straightforward, but turned out to be one of the most complicated projects in human history. By the beginning of the 20th century, medicine had made enormous progress. Scientists understood bacteria. Hospitals were becoming more organized. Surgery was improving, and physicians were beginning to rely on evidence instead of ancient theories about mysterious bodily fluids. Unfortunately, progress rarely moves in a perfectly straight line. Human beings have a remarkable talent for solving one problem while accidentally creating another. And nowhere was that more obvious than in the history of pain relief. For most of history, surgery was horrifying. Not necessarily because surgeons lacked skill. Many were surprisingly talented. The problem was that patients remained awake. Fully awake. Imagine needing a major operation. Imagine lying on a table while several assistants held you down. Imagine hearing every sound, feeling every movement, knowing exactly what was happening. Now imagine the surgeon proudly explaining that he could complete the procedure in only 3 minutes. That wasn't a joke. Speed became one of the most important surgical skills. The faster the surgeon worked, the less suffering the patient endured. Some surgeons became famous for extraordinary speed. Operations were timed. Records were celebrated. Students watched in amazement. Modern medicine usually measures success differently. But in those days, finishing quickly could mean the difference between survival and complete physical collapse. Then came anesthesia, and everything changed. Almost overnight, surgery became far more humane. Doctors could finally operate without forcing patients to endure unimaginable pain. The discovery felt revolutionary because it was. Substances like ether and chloroform allowed patients to lose consciousness during procedures. For physicians, it seemed almost miraculous. For patients, it was considerably better than being held down by 6 large assistants. Everyone was thrilled, at least initially. Then reality introduced some complications. Because early anesthesia carried risks, doctors still had much to learn about proper dosages. Too little anesthesia could result in patients waking during surgery. Too much could stop breathing altogether. Finding the correct balance required experience. And unfortunately, experience is often acquired one mistake at a time. Early medical journals contain numerous reports of complications. Some patients reacted badly. Others never woke up. Yet despite these dangers, anesthesia represented a massive improvement. For perhaps the first time in history, doctors possessed a genuinely transformative medical tool. And that success created a new challenge: confidence. Medical history repeatedly demonstrates a fascinating pattern. When physicians gain a powerful new treatment, enthusiasm tends to arrive immediately. Limitations usually arrive later. This pattern appeared again with another famous drug: heroin. Yes, heroin. Today, most people associate heroin with addiction and devastating social consequences. But when it first appeared in the late 19th century, many doctors viewed it very differently. The drug was developed and marketed as a medicine. Manufacturers promoted it as a treatment for coughs, respiratory illnesses, and pain. Some even suggested it might help patients overcome addiction to morphine. History occasionally produces moments so ironic that they seem fictional. This was one of them. A substance now infamous for addiction was once advertised as a solution to addiction. Initially, physicians were impressed. Patients experienced relief. Symptoms improved. Pain diminished. Everything seemed promising. Then longer-term effects became clearer. Dependency developed. Addiction emerged. And doctors gradually realized they had underestimated the drug's risks. Once again, medicine found itself confronting a familiar lesson. Short-term success does not always predict long-term outcomes. A treatment can appear wonderful for months before revealing hidden dangers. The body often keeps secrets, and history is filled with people who discovered those secrets too late. Meanwhile, another controversial medical practice was gaining popularity. This one involved the human mind. Mental illness has always challenged physicians. Symptoms can be difficult to understand. Causes can be difficult to identify. And throughout history, people often confused mental health conditions with everything from spiritual problems to personal failings. By the early 20th century, doctors desperately wanted effective treatments. Hospitals were overcrowded. Patients suffered tremendously. Families searched for answers. Into this environment came one of the most controversial procedures ever developed: the lobotomy. A lobotomy involved surgically altering parts of the brain. The theory seemed reasonable to many physicians at the time. If certain brain pathways contributed to severe mental illness, perhaps modifying those pathways could help. Early reports appeared encouraging. Some patients became calmer. Some became easier to manage. Hospitals embraced the procedure. Doctors performed thousands, then tens of thousands. Soon, lobotomies spread across multiple countries. And for a while, many physicians considered them a major breakthrough. The problem was that calmness and recovery are not necessarily the same thing. As more outcomes became available, serious concerns emerged. Many patients experienced profound personality changes. Some lost initiative. Others lost emotional depth. Some became permanently impaired. Families sometimes described their loved ones as fundamentally altered, not healed, altered. The tragedy was compounded by good intentions. Most physicians genuinely believed they were helping. Many families consented because alternatives were limited. Everyone wanted improvement. The procedure simply failed to deliver what had been promised. Eventually, new psychiatric medications reduced the popularity of lobotomies. Public opinion shifted. Medical standards changed, and one of history's most controversial treatments gradually disappeared. Yet its legacy remains a cautionary tale, because sometimes a treatment becomes widely accepted long before its consequences are fully understood. Now let's turn to another chapter in medical history. Miracle drugs. The phrase itself should probably trigger a small amount of skepticism. History has attached the word miracle to many products that later became cautionary exhibits. But occasionally a genuine breakthrough does occur. And perhaps no discovery transformed medicine more dramatically than antibiotics. Before antibiotics, bacterial infections killed enormous numbers of people. Minor injuries could become fatal. Routine illnesses could become deadly. Doctors often felt helpless. Then antibiotics arrived. Suddenly, infections that once terrified physicians became treatable. The results seemed extraordinary. Because they were. Lives were saved. Hospitals changed. Mortality rates fell. Entire categories of disease became far less dangerous. The excitement was understandable. Yet success brought new problems. Antibiotics worked so well that they were sometimes prescribed too freely. Patients expected them. Doctors supplied them. And over time, bacteria began adapting. Microorganisms, unfortunately, possess remarkable evolutionary determination. Humanity develops a weapon. Bacteria begin finding ways around it. The struggle continues. Medical history is filled with victories. Few remain permanent. Another strange chapter involves so-called rejuvenation treatments. For centuries, wealthy individuals searched for ways to reverse aging. Most failed. Some failed spectacularly. One particularly bizarre trend emerged during the early 20th century. Certain physicians believed animal glands could restore youthful vitality. Operations were performed. Animal tissue was transplanted. Claims were made. Money changed hands. And wealthy clients eagerly signed up. The treatments rarely delivered meaningful results, but they generated enormous publicity. The promise of youth has always been profitable. Evidence is often less profitable. This imbalance appears repeatedly throughout history. People desperately want certain things to be true. Long life, perfect health, effortless cures, miracle solutions. The stronger the desire, the easier it becomes to overlook inconvenient facts. Medical entrepreneurs have understood this for thousands of years, and patients have remained human for just as long. As the 20th century continued, medicine became increasingly scientific. Clinical trials expanded. Regulations strengthened. Research improved. Many dangerous treatments disappeared. Others survived only as historical curiosities. Yet even modern medicine occasionally faces the same challenges. Excitement can outrun evidence. New discoveries can generate unrealistic expectations, and doctors remain human beings, capable of mistakes despite their expertise. Perhaps that is one of the most fascinating lessons in this entire story. Medical history is not simply a record of errors. It is a record of people trying to understand disease, trying to relieve suffering, trying to help patients with the knowledge available at the time. Sometimes they succeeded brilliantly. Sometimes they failed catastrophically. Most often, they operated somewhere in between. And that long process of trial and error gradually built the medical world we know today. So as tonight's chapter comes to a close, let the operating theaters grow quiet. Let the patent medicines gather dust. Let the miracle cures fade into memory. And imagine generations of physicians, scientists, nurses, and patients all contributing small pieces to an enormous puzzle. A puzzle humanity is still solving. One discovery, one mistake, and one lesson at a time. Meanwhile, somewhere in the distant past, a doctor is confidently recommending a treatment that future generations will regard with absolute disbelief. And history, patient as ever, is already preparing the footnotes. Tonight, the gas lamps are glowing softly. The hospital corridors are quiet. The surgeons have finally put away their remarkably alarming collection of instruments. And we're continuing our journey through the strange medical ideas that once convinced millions of people they were on the path to better health. As always, most of the people involved genuinely wanted to help. That is one of the recurring themes of medical history. The intentions were often admirable. The outcomes were sometimes less impressive, occasionally much less impressive. Tonight we're stepping into the 19th and early 20th centuries, a period when medicine was advancing rapidly but still possessed enough blind spots to fill several libraries. This was an age of discovery, an age of innovation, an age when scientific breakthroughs appeared almost monthly. It was also an age when doctors occasionally looked at a dangerous substance and thought, perhaps we should prescribe that. History rarely lacks confidence. Let's begin with surgery. Modern operating rooms are clean, carefully controlled environments. Everything is sterilized. Procedures are planned meticulously. Teams monitor patients continuously. The average modern surgical experience is astonishing compared to what came before. But for much of history, surgery occupied a very different category. Even after anesthesia became available, another enormous problem remained: infection. Surgeons could remove diseased tissue, repair injuries, perform increasingly complex procedures. Yet many patients died afterward from infections. The operation itself might succeed. The recovery might not. This puzzled physicians for generations. Hospitals often seemed dangerous places. Patients entered for treatment and sometimes left with illnesses they didn't originally have. No one fully understood why. Then came one of the most important medical discoveries ever made: the growing acceptance of germ theory. Scientists such as Louis Pasteur demonstrated that microscopic organisms played a crucial role in disease. Meanwhile, surgeons like Joseph Lister began applying antiseptic techniques. The results were extraordinary. Infection rates fell dramatically. Survival rates improved. Surgery became safer. Not perfectly safe, but significantly safer. Interestingly, many physicians initially resisted these ideas. This may seem strange today. After all, evidence supported the new approach. But accepting germ theory required abandoning long-held assumptions. And human beings rarely enjoy abandoning assumptions, especially when those assumptions have built successful careers. Some doctors embraced the changes immediately. Others remained skeptical. A few resisted fiercely. History often portrays scientific progress as a smooth march forward. In reality, it frequently resembles an argument that lasts 20 years. Eventually, evidence won. but not before countless debates filled medical journals and lecture halls. While surgeons battled infection, another strange medical trend was emerging. Health fads. Humanity has always loved health fads. Ancient civilizations had them. Medieval societies had them. The modern world certainly has them. And the 19th century produced some truly memorable examples. One popular belief involved electricity. Electricity fascinated the public. It illuminated cities, powered machines, transformed communication. It seemed almost magical. Naturally, entrepreneurs wondered whether electricity could also cure disease. The answer, according to advertisement, was apparently yes. Electric belts appeared. Electric vests. Electric brushes. Electric rings. Electric chairs. Not that kind of electric chair. A much less alarming version. Manufacturers promised improved vitality, stronger nerves, enhanced circulation, better digestion, and practically every other benefit they could fit into a newspaper advertisement. Some devices delivered mild electrical stimulation. Others barely function at all. The marketing often proved more powerful than the technology. Consumers eagerly purchased these products. Many reported improvements. The placebo effect, it turns out, has a very long history and a remarkably successful marketing department. Another curious trend involved weight loss. For centuries, people searched for easier ways to control body weight. This desire created enormous opportunities for questionable treatments. One particularly dangerous method involved substances containing arsenic. Again, arsenic appears throughout medical history with surprising frequency. Like an unwanted guest who keeps returning to the party. Certain products claimed small doses would accelerate metabolism and promote weight loss. The advertisements sounded persuasive. The science remained considerably less persuasive. Some users experienced serious health consequences. Others received little benefit beyond an expensive lesson. Yet the market continued. Because whenever a product promises dramatic results with minimal effort, customers tend to appear. Human nature has remained remarkably consistent. Perhaps the most infamous weight loss disaster involved tapeworms. Yes, actual tapeworms. The idea was simple and horrifying. If a parasite consumed some of your food, perhaps you would absorb fewer calories. Technically, there was a certain logic involved. Unfortunately, there is also a parasite involved. And parasites tend to have their own priorities. People who intentionally introduce tapeworms into their bodies occasionally discover that sharing your digestive system with a hungry organism comes with disadvantages. A shocking revelation, admittedly. Health complications followed. Nutritional deficiencies occurred. Some infections became severe. Yet the idea persisted longer than common sense might suggest. Medical history occasionally demonstrates that desperation can overpower caution. Now let's talk about X-rays. When X-rays were discovered in the late 19th century, the scientific world was astonished. For the first time, doctors could look inside the human body without surgery. Bones became visible. Foreign objects could be located. Diagnoses improved. The technology felt miraculous. Because in many ways it was. The problem was that early users didn't fully understand the risks. X-ray machines appeared at exhibitions. Department stores offered demonstrations. People willingly exposed themselves to radiation. Repeatedly. Sometimes for entertainment. Sometimes for fashion. Shoe stores even introduced fluoroscopes that allowed customers to view the bones inside their feet while trying on shoes. Imagine shopping for footwear and deciding what the experience really needed was a small dose of radiation. The early 20th century was a fascinating place. Many technicians, doctors, and researchers suffered injuries from prolonged exposure. Burns developed. Skin damage appeared. More serious health problems emerged over time. Only gradually did people recognize the dangers. Protective measures increased. Safety standards improved. And another lesson entered the growing book of medical caution. A powerful tool remains powerful whether or not you understand it completely. One of the saddest examples involved the famous radium girls. These young women worked painting luminous watch dials using radium-based paint. Employers encouraged them to sharpen their brushes with their lips, over and over, day after day. Many unknowingly ingested radioactive material. Years later, devastating illnesses appeared. Their suffering helped expose the dangers of radiation and contributed to improved workplace protections. The story remains one of the most tragic chapters in industrial and medical history, and one of the clearest reminders that new technologies often reveal their risks only after widespread use. Meanwhile, wealthy patients continued searching for longevity. The dream of extended youth never disappeared. If anything, it became stronger. Doctors, entrepreneurs, and self-proclaimed experts offered endless solutions. Special diets, secret formulas, exotic treatments, elixirs, tonics, injections. Some promised eternal vitality. Others merely promised to slow aging. Few delivered what they claimed. One fashionable treatment involved mineral waters. Across Europe and North America, health resorts flourished. Visitors traveled long distances to drink water from famous springs. Some locations genuinely offered pleasant environments, rest, exercise, and cleaner air. Those factors alone could improve health. The water itself sometimes received most of the credit. Guests often returned home convinced they had discovered a miracle. In reality, escaping stress, sleeping properly, and taking a vacation may have been doing much of the work. A possibility that tourism brochures generally preferred not to emphasize. As medicine advanced, doctors increasingly demanded evidence for extraordinary claims. This transformed healthcare. Slowly, ineffective treatments disappeared. Not all at once. Some lingered. Others evolved. But scientific testing gradually changed expectations. A treatment could no longer survive solely because people believed in it. It needed proof. This was a revolutionary shift. And yet, despite all these advances, the temptation of miracle cures never vanished completely. Even today, bold promises attract attention. Simple solutions attract customers. And extraordinary claims continue finding enthusiastic audiences. History suggests a useful rule. The more miraculous a treatment sounds, the more carefully it deserves examination. Not because every new idea is wrong. Many breakthroughs begin as surprising discoveries, but because history contains thousands of examples where confidence arrived years before evidence. And confidence, as we've learned repeatedly throughout this story, is not the same thing as being correct. So as tonight's chapter comes to an end, let the old hospital wards grow quiet. Let the electrical health devices stop buzzing. Let the mineral spas close their doors. And imagine generations of patients chasing the same dream. A healthier body, a longer life, a cure for suffering. Sometimes finding it, sometimes missing it, but always continuing the search. And somewhere in the distance, another inventor is preparing to unveil a revolutionary treatment guaranteed to change everything forever. A claim that history has heard many times before, and one it has learned to greet with a politely raised eyebrow. The wards are quiet now. The gas lamps flicker gently against stone walls. The surgeons have gone home. The patients are sleeping, or at least they're trying to. And tonight we're continuing our journey through the strange, dangerous, and occasionally astonishing world of historical medicine. So get comfortable, pull the blanket a little higher, and let's step into a chapter filled with kings, emperors, royal physicians, experimental treatments, and medical decisions that would later leave historians staring into the distance for several minutes. One of the most interesting things about medical history is that wealth did not always guarantee safety. In fact, being rich occasionally increased your chances of receiving dangerous treatment. Poor patients might receive little care. Wealthy patients received everything. Every treatment, every theory, every fashionable procedure, every experimental idea. And when doctors weren't sure what was wrong, they sometimes applied multiple treatments at once, which rarely improved matters. Nowhere was this more obvious than in royal courts. Kings had access to the finest physicians available, at least the physicians with the best reputations. Whether those reputations reflected actual effectiveness was another question entirely. Royal doctors faced enormous pressure. If a peasant died, it was tragic. If a king died, governments could collapse. Wars could begin. Entire dynasties could change direction. That sort of pressure tends to encourage decisive action. And throughout history, decisive action often meant doing more. Not necessarily doing better, just doing more. Consider the unfortunate experience of many European monarchs during the 17th and 18th centuries. A king develops a fever. Immediately physicians gather. Consultations begin. Theories multiply. One doctor recommends bloodletting. Another recommends purging. A third prescribes special dietary restrictions. A fourth introduces a tonic made from ingredients that sound suspiciously like whatever happened to be available in the pharmacy that afternoon. The patient receives all of it, because nobody wants to be the physician who suggested restraint while everyone else appeared busy. The results sometimes resemble the competition, not for effectiveness, for intervention. History contains countless accounts of rulers weakened as much by treatment as by disease itself. One particularly tragic example involved the medical care of kings suffering from infections. Before antibiotics, doctors possessed few reliable options. They wanted desperately to help, yet their tools remained limited. Bloodletting often became the default response. Repeated bloodletting, aggressive bloodletting, the sort of bloodletting that modern doctors would classify somewhere between absolutely not and please stop immediately. Patients who needed strength instead lost vital blood volume. Recovery became more difficult. Yet because the underlying disease remained mysterious, physicians often interpreted worsening symptoms as proof that even more treatment was necessary. Human beings have a remarkable ability to double down when evidence becomes inconvenient. Now let's move from kings to emperors. Perhaps no ruler symbolizes immense power more than Napoleon Bonaparte. By the time Napoleon reached his final years on the island of St. Helena, his health had become a subject of endless debate. Doctors monitored him closely. Observers recorded symptoms. Theories circulated constantly. Even today, historians continue discussing the exact causes of his decline. At various points, treatments reflected the medical knowledge of the era. Purges, dietary adjustments, various medicines, many of which carried side effects of their own. What makes cases like Napoleon fascinating is that they reveal the limits of contemporary medicine. Doctors observed carefully. They documented symptoms. They genuinely tried to help. But without modern diagnostic tools, much remained uncertain. Medicine often resembled detective work conducted in near darkness. Occasionally the detective guessed correctly, occasionally not. And then there was mental health. For centuries, Physicians struggled to understand conditions affecting the mind. Explanations varied dramatically. Some attributed symptoms to physical illness. Others blamed emotional distress. Still others proposed spiritual causes. The treatments reflected this uncertainty. One surprisingly common approach involved cold water. Lots of cold water. Patients might be immersed in cold baths, sprayed with cold water, wrapped in wet sheets. The theory varied from doctor to doctor. Some believed it calmed agitation. Others thought it stimulated the nervous system. Many institutions adopted hydrotherapy enthusiastically. Patients often disliked it just as enthusiastically. Cold water treatments became particularly fashionable during the 19th century. Visitors entering certain facilities might easily conclude they had accidentally stumbled into a very uncomfortable swimming program. To be fair, some patients may have found temporary relief. Others certainly did not. Like many historical treatments, results vary dramatically. Yet hydrotherapy remained popular because alternatives were limited. When doctors lack effective solutions, almost any intervention can seem attractive, especially if it appears scientific. Another curious chapter involves the history of transfusions. Today, blood transfusions save countless lives. But the road towards safe transfusion practices was long and occasionally alarming. Early physicians understood that blood seemed important. An understatement, admittedly. They wondered whether transferring blood between individuals might restore health. The basic concept possessed promise. The details needed work. A great deal of work. 17th century experiments sometimes involved animal blood. Yes, animal blood. Sheep blood entered the conversation surprisingly often. Researchers reasoned that transferring blood from calm animals might produce calming effects in humans. This sounds questionable now. Because it was questionable then. Some patients survived. Others experienced severe reactions. The scientific understanding necessary for safe transfusions simply didn't exist yet. Doctors did not know about blood types. They didn't understand immune responses. They were exploring unfamiliar territory with limited maps. Eventually, better knowledge emerged. Blood groups were identified. Compatibility became understood. Modern transfusion medicine developed. But the early experiments remind us that progress often begins with imperfect attempts. Sometimes very imperfect attempts. Meanwhile, another trend swept through parts of Europe and America. Medical devices. The 19th century adored medical devices. Inventors created machines for nearly everything. If you suffered headaches, there was a device. Digestive trouble? A device. Nervousness? Several devices. General unhappiness? Probably a device. Many looked impressively complicated. Gears, springs, electrical components, polished metal surfaces. The more elaborate the machine appeared, the more convincing it often seemed. Functionality occasionally received less attention. Advertisements promised extraordinary benefits, improved circulation, enhanced vitality, stronger nerves, better sleep, greater energy, longer life. The same promises appeared repeatedly because they appealed to universal desires. People wanted health. Inventors wanted customers. The arrangement practically wrote itself. Some devices performed mild physical therapy. Others delivered harmless sensations. A few were outright frauds. Consumers frequently struggled to distinguish between them. Scientific regulation remained limited. Marketing faced fewer restrictions, and hope remained a powerful sales tool. Then there were the cures for aging. Humanity's relationship with aging has always been complicated. Nobody particularly enjoys growing older. As a result, anti-aging treatments have existed for thousands of years. Ancient civilizations searched for longevity. Medieval alchemists searched for longevity. Victorian entrepreneurs searched for longevity. Modern influencers search for longevity. Some traditions are remarkably durable. One especially strange trend involved glandular therapy. Certain doctors believed extracts from animal organs could restore youth. Patients received injections. Preparations were consumed. Extraordinary claims circulated. Scientific support remained somewhat less extraordinary. Yet wealthy clients lined up eagerly. Because aging, unlike many diseases, affects everyone. And universal problems create enormous markets. History repeatedly demonstrates this principle. The dream remains the same. Only the packaging changes. As the 20th century progressed, medical research became increasingly rigorous. Clinical trials improved. Laboratory science expanded. Doctors gained powerful new tools. Many dangerous treatments disappeared. Some survived only in museums. Others became cautionary tales taught to medical students. Yet one lesson continued appearing over and over. Knowledge matters. Evidence matters. Testing matters. Without them, even intelligent and compassionate physicians can cause harm. That truth lies at the heart of this entire story. Most historical doctors were not fools. Many were highly educated by the standards of their era. Many cared deeply about their patients. What they lacked was information. And medicine, perhaps more than any other profession, depends upon information being correct. A small mistake in theory can become a large mistake in practice. The consequences appear in real lives, real suffering, real histories, which is why the slow accumulation of scientific knowledge became so transformative. Every discovery mattered. Every experiment contributed something. Even failures sometimes taught valuable lessons. So as tonight's chapter fades into the darkness, let the royal physicians return to their chambers. Let the hydrotherapy bath finally cool. Let the experimental machines stop humming. And imagine countless generations of doctors working with the best knowledge available to them, sometimes succeeding brilliantly, sometimes failing tragically, but always searching, always questioning, always trying to understand the mysterious machinery of the human body. A puzzle that has challenged humanity for thousands of years, and one that, despite all our progress, still holds more than a few secrets. Tonight, we're leaving behind the royal courts, the experimental machines, and the enthusiastic inventors with their miracle devices. Instead, we're traveling much farther into the past, back before laboratories, before microscopes, before anyone had the slightest idea that tiny invisible organisms were responsible for many diseases. We're heading into the ancient and medieval worlds, a place where medicine, religion, superstition, observation, and guesswork often shared the same room, and occasionally shared the same prescription. So get comfortable. The night is quiet. The stars are overhead. And somewhere in the distance, an ancient physician is preparing a treatment that will make modern audiences very grateful for modern healthcare. Let's begin in ancient Egypt. Ancient Egyptian medicine was actually far more advanced than many people realize. Egyptian physicians carefully observed symptoms. They recorded treatments. They performed certain surgical procedures. They even developed specialized medical roles. Some doctors focused on particular parts of the body, which was remarkably sophisticated for the ancient world. Yet Egyptian medicine also contained ideas that sound rather unusual today. Many remedies included natural ingredients. Honey appeared frequently. And to be fair, honey genuinely possesses antibacterial properties. This was one of those rare occasions when ancient medicine accidentally stumbled onto something useful. Unfortunately, honey wasn't the only ingredient. Animal products appeared regularly. Various plant mixtures were common, and sometimes physicians prescribed substances that modern readers would prefer not to imagine in detail during a relaxing bedtime story. One treatment for infections reportedly involved applying mixtures containing animal waste. The reasoning made sense within the framework of the time. The results were somewhat less impressive. Still, Egyptian physicians deserve credit for careful observation. They often recognized patterns. They understood injuries, and they created medical texts that influenced later civilizations. Medicine was moving forward. Slowly, very slowly, but forward nonetheless. Next, we travel north to ancient Greece. The Greeks transformed medicine in profound ways, most famously through the work of Hippocrates. Today, Hippocrates is often called the father of medicine. His influence lasted for centuries. He encouraged physicians to observe patients carefully and search for natural explanations for disease. This represented a major shift. Instead of blaming every illness on supernatural forces, doctors increasingly looked for physical causes. A revolutionary idea. Of course, not every Greek medical theory proved correct. As we've discussed before, the theory of the four humors dominated medical thinking for generations. Health depended on balancing blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. The theory explained almost everything, which, as history repeatedly demonstrates, is usually a warning sign. When one idea explains every possible symptom, it often explains none of them particularly well. Yet the humor theory survived for nearly 2,000 years. An astonishing achievement for a concept that turned out to be fundamentally mistaken. Ancient Rome inherited much of Greek medicine. The Romans added their own contributions. Aqueducts improved sanitation. Public baths promoted hygiene. Infrastructure supported larger populations. These achievements genuinely improved public health. But Roman medicine still struggled with many mysteries. One influential physician was Galen. Galen became one of the most important medical authorities in history. His writings dominated medicine for over 1,000 years. Students copied them. Doctors memorized them. Universities taught them. His influence was immense. The problem was that some of his conclusions were wrong. Not because Galen lacked intelligence. Far from it. He worked with limited information. Human dissection was restricted in many places. As a result, Galen often studied animals instead. Then he applied those findings to humans. Sometimes successfully, sometimes not. Yet because his reputation became so powerful, later physicians often treated his work as unquestionable truth. And once an authority becomes unquestionable, scientific progress tends to slow down. History repeatedly rewards curiosity. It is less generous towards certainty. Now let's move into the Middle Ages, a period often misunderstood. Contrary to popular stereotypes, medieval medicine was not entirely irrational. Doctors studied classical texts. Universities emerged. Knowledge circulated across Europe, the Middle East, and beyond. Yet disease remained terrifyingly mysterious. And nowhere was that mystery more frightening than during plague outbreaks, particularly the great pandemic known as the Black Death. Beginning in the 14th century, the Black Death devastated vast regions. Entire communities suffered. Millions died. Fear spread almost as quickly as the disease itself. Doctors struggled desperately to understand what was happening. Unfortunately, they lacked crucial information. No one knew about bacteria. No one understood fleas. No one recognized the role of rats in spreading infection. Instead, physicians developed theories based on the knowledge available to them. One popular explanation involved bad air, miasma. People believed disease spread through poisonous vapors. The theory seemed logical. After all, foul smells often accompanied sickness. The connection appeared obvious. It was also incomplete. This belief helped inspire one of history's most recognizable medical outfits, the plague doctor costume. Those famous beaked masks weren't merely decorative. The beaks contained aromatic substances, herbs, flowers, spices. Doctors hoped these materials would filter dangerous air. From a modern perspective, the costume looks unsettling, like a giant medical bird investigating public health emergencies. At the time, however, it represented sincere medical effort. The physicians wearing those masks often displayed considerable courage. They treated patients during terrifying outbreaks. Many risked their own lives. The treatments themselves were another matter. Bloodletting remained popular. Herbal remedies appeared frequently. Special diets were prescribed. Protective amulets circulated widely. People tried almost anything. When confronted with disaster, humans rarely sit still. Action feels better than helplessness, even when the action doesn't work. One particularly ancient practice deserves attention: trepanation. The procedure involved drilling or cutting holes into the skull. Yes, the skull. And remarkably, trepanation existed across numerous cultures. Archaeologists have discovered evidence from many regions and periods. Some patients survived. We know this because their skulls show signs of healing. The reasons varied. Certain procedures may have treated head injuries. Others likely reflected spiritual beliefs. Still others attempted to relieve symptoms such as headaches or seizures. The practice sounds terrifying. Yet it also demonstrates something fascinating. Even thousands of years ago, humans were willing to perform complex procedures in pursuit of healing. The courage involved is undeniable. The accuracy of the underlying theories is another question. Now we arrive at one of the strangest chapters in medical history: corpse medicine. A phrase that sounds fictional, yet unfortunately isn't. During parts of medieval and early modern Europe, human remains occasionally became medical ingredients. Powdered skulls appeared in remedies. Human fat entered certain preparations. Blood sometimes served medicinal purposes. The reasoning varied. Some believe vitality could be transferred from one body to another. Others relied on traditions stretching back centuries. To modern audiences, the practice feels deeply unsettling. To many people of the time, it seemed perfectly reasonable. History frequently reminds us that normality is relative. Practices considered ordinary in one era may appear astonishing in another, and vice versa. Perhaps the most important lesson from all these examples is that historical medicine rarely lacked effort. Doctors worked hard. Patients hoped desperately. Communities searched for answers. The challenge was understanding disease itself. Without microscopes, laboratory testing, or modern biology, people operated with only fragments of the puzzle. Some fragments were correct, others were not. Distinguishing between them required centuries of work. Slowly, knowledge accumulated. Observations improved. Mistakes were identified. The scientific method emerged. And medicine gradually transformed from a collection of traditions into a system increasingly guided by evidence. The process was neither quick nor smooth. Yet it happened. One discovery at a time. One correction at a time. One generation at a time. So as tonight's chapter comes to a close, Let the ancient temples grow quiet. Let the Roman physicians roll up their scrolls. Let the plague doctors disappear into the fog. And let the medieval healers extinguish their lanterns for the evening. Their world was filled with uncertainty. Their tools were limited. Their theories often imperfect. Yet their efforts laid foundations for future generations. A long chain of curiosity stretching across thousands of years. Sometimes brilliant, sometimes mistaken, always human. And tomorrow night, our journey through the strange history of medicine will continue into even stranger territory, where alchemists, miracle healers, and ambitious doctors push the boundaries of belief, science, and common sense in ways that would leave modern physicians reaching for a very large notebook. Tonight, the plague doctors have vanished into the mist. The Roman scrolls have been carefully rolled shut. The ancient temples are quiet. And we're about to enter one of the strangest chapters in the entire history of medicine. Because if there is one dream that has followed humanity through every civilization, every empire, and every century, it is the dream of living longer. Much longer. Possibly forever. People have searched for immortality for thousands of years. Kings search for it. Emperors search for it. Alchemists search for it. Wealthy nobles search for it. And countless ordinary people search for it as well. The goal never changed. The methods, however, often became increasingly bizarre. Tonight we're exploring the history of immortality cures, or more accurately, the history of treatments that promised longer life and occasionally achieved the exact opposite. So, settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin. One of the oldest examples comes from ancient China. For centuries, Chinese scholars, physicians, and alchemists explored ways to extend life. Many pursued legitimate medical knowledge. Others became fascinated by the possibility of immortality itself, particularly within certain traditions of alchemy. The goal seemed simple enough. Find a substance capable of preserving life indefinitely. Unfortunately, reality proved less cooperative. One of the great ironies of history is that numerous immortality treatments turned out to be poisonous. Among the most common ingredients was mercury. Yes, mercury again. At this point, mercury has appeared so often in our story that it practically deserves its own chapter. Ancient alchemists often viewed mercury as mysterious and powerful. Its unusual appearance fascinated observers. Unlike most metals, it flowed like liquid. It seemed alive, almost magical. Surely, many reasoned, such a remarkable substance must possess extraordinary properties. And perhaps it did. Unfortunately, one of those properties was toxicity. Several Chinese emperors reportedly consumed mercury-based preparations intended to extend life. Instead, the treatments may have contributed to illness and premature death, which is not generally considered a successful immortality strategy. One famous example was Qin Shi Huang. Qin Shi Huang spent enormous resources searching for eternal life. He sent expeditions across the seas. He consulted scholars. He pursued legendary remedies. Historical accounts suggest he consumed preparations containing mercury. The irony is difficult to ignore. A ruler who united vast territories and built monumental projects may have been harmed by the very medicine intended to preserve him. History occasionally possesses a dark sense of humor. Yet Qin Shi Huang was hardly alone. Generation after generation continued the search. The desire remained powerful. And whenever people strongly desire something, they often become vulnerable to extraordinary promises. This pattern appears in every era. Ancient kingdoms, medieval courts, modern cities. The details change. Human nature remains surprisingly familiar. Now let's move westward into medieval and Renaissance Europe. Here, Another group joined the quest for longevity, the alchemists. Today, alchemists are often remembered for trying to transform ordinary metals into gold, and many certainly attempted exactly that. But alchemy involved much more than treasure. Many practitioners genuinely sought knowledge. They studied chemistry, medicine, and natural philosophy. They experimented constantly, sometimes productively, sometimes alarmingly. One of their greatest goals was the legendary Philosopher's Stone. This mysterious substance supposedly possessed extraordinary powers. It could create gold, purify materials, and according to some traditions, produce an elixir of life, an ultimate medicine, a cure for aging itself. Needless to say, nobody ever found it. If they had, history textbooks would probably be very different. Nevertheless, the search continued for centuries. Laboratories filled with strange equipment. Glass vessels bubbled over flames. Scholars recorded observations. Patrons funded experiments. Entire careers revolved around the possibility that immortality might be hiding just beyond the next discovery. The story sounds fantastical, yet it reveals something important. Many alchemists were early scientists. Their theories often proved incorrect, but their curiosity helped lay foundations for future chemistry. Progress sometimes emerges from failed questions, even spectacularly failed questions. Speaking of spectacular failures, let's discuss one of history's most persistent medical traditions, miracle elixirs. Nearly every civilization produced them. A special drink, a secret formula, a rare ingredient, a mysterious preparation available only from certain experts. The claims were always impressive. Longer life, perfect health, renewed youth, boundless energy. The evidence was usually less impressive. Some elixirs contain herbs. Others included alcohol. A few incorporated metals or minerals that modern toxicologists would strongly discourage. Consumers purchased them eagerly, because the promise of health remains one of humanity's most effective advertisements. It always has been, even when experience suggests caution. During the Renaissance, wealthy nobles frequently spent fortunes on these preparations. Court physicians developed elaborate formulas. Ingredients arrived from distant lands. Rare substances commanded extraordinary prices. The more expensive a treatment became, the more convinced people often seemed of its effectiveness. This phenomenon has survived remarkably well into modern times. A costly remedy somehow feels more convincing than a simple one. History repeatedly demonstrates otherwise. Now let's visit another curious chapter in medical history. Animal-based rejuvenation therapies. For centuries, people believed animal vitality might somehow transfer to humans. Different cultures developed different versions of this idea. Certain animal organs were considered especially valuable. Particular creatures became associated with strength, endurance, or longevity. The logic followed a simple path. If an animal possessed desirable qualities, perhaps consuming part of that animal would provide similar benefits. Science would eventually disagree. But for a long time, the theory remained popular. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, versions of this concept experienced a surprising revival. Some physicians promoted injections derived from animal glands. The treatments generated enormous publicity. Patients reported feeling younger, stronger, more energetic. Whether those improvements reflected actual physiology or powerful expectation remains open to debate. The placebo effect has always been one of medicine's most fascinating characters. Invisible, persistent, and remarkably persuasive. Another fascinating example involves royal courts. Kings and emperors often attracted healers promising extraordinary cures. Some practitioners genuinely believed in their methods. Others recognized profitable opportunities. Distinguishing between the two could be difficult, especially when rulers desperately wanted good news. History contains many examples of advisors telling powerful people exactly what they wanted to hear. Medical advisors were no exception. An emperor searching for eternal life represented an excellent customer, potentially a customer for life, assuming the treatment worked, which, unfortunately, it generally did not. One recurring pattern appears again and again. A ruler grows older. Health concerns increase. Physicians propose stronger remedies. The treatments become more experimental, more expensive, more dramatic, and occasionally more dangerous. Because aging itself is a formidable opponent. Even today, despite astonishing medical advances, no physician can stop it completely. Ancient doctors faced even greater challenges. Yet the search never ended. And perhaps it never will. Now let's consider something surprisingly important. Why were people willing to trust such questionable treatments? Part of the answer lies in fear. Illness is frightening. Aging is frightening. Death is frightening. Whenever people face uncertainty, certainty becomes attractive. Even false certainty. A healer who confidently promises a solution can appear reassuring, especially compared to someone who honestly admits they don't know. This creates a problem. Reality often contains uncertainty. Charlatans rarely do. History repeatedly shows that confidence and competence are not always the same thing. The distinction matters enormously. Fortunately, medicine gradually learned this lesson. Evidence became increasingly important. Claims required testing. Experiments became more rigorous. Extraordinary promises demanded extraordinary proof. The transformation took centuries, but it changed everything. Modern medicine still searches for ways to extend healthy life. Researchers study aging. Scientists investigate longevity. New discoveries appear regularly. The difference is that modern investigations rely on evidence rather than alchemical symbolism or mercury cocktails. A considerable improvement, all things considered. So as tonight's chapter slowly drifts toward its conclusion, let the alchemists extinguish their furnaces. Let the emperors set aside their immortality potions. Let the secret elixirs gather dust on forgotten shelves. And imagine thousands of years of human beings all pursuing the same impossible dream. More time, more life, more tomorrows. A dream powerful enough to inspire brilliant discoveries and occasionally terrible mistakes. A dream that still exists today, though thankfully with far fewer mercury-based beverages involved. And somewhere in the darkness of history, an ambitious alchemist is still peering into a bubbling flask, absolutely convinced that eternal life is only one experiment away. A belief that humanity has been entertaining for a very long time indeed. Tonight, the alchemists have finally gone to bed. The emperors have put away their immortality potions. The bubbling flasks have cooled. And we're moving into another remarkable corner of medical history. A world filled with miracle cures, traveling salesmen, wonder tonics, secret formulas, and enough exaggerated advertising to make modern marketing departments look positively restrained. Tonight, we're exploring the age of medical fraud, or at least medical fraud mixed generously with optimism, wishful thinking, misunderstanding, and occasional complete absence of shame. So, settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin. One of the most fascinating realities of history is that fake medicine isn't new. Not even remotely. The moment people started getting sick, someone somewhere almost certainly started selling an expensive solution. The pattern is ancient. A problem appears. A cure is promised. Money changes hands. Results become difficult to verify. And somehow the cure remains available for years, sometimes decades, occasionally centuries. Medical fraud survives because it exploits something very human. Well, when people are healthy, they tend to be skeptical. When people are suffering, skepticism often becomes harder. Pain creates urgency. Fear creates vulnerability. And uncertainty creates opportunity. History contains many examples of individuals who recognized this opportunity immediately. By the 19th century, large parts of Europe and North America were experiencing enormous social change. Cities were growing. Transportation was improving. Newspapers circulated widely. Information traveled faster than ever before. And so did advertisements. This created ideal conditions for one of history's most colorful characters, the traveling medicine salesman. These individuals moved from town to town promoting remarkable remedies. Some were sincere, others were not. Most existed somewhere between those extremes. A medicine wagon would arrive. Crowds gathered. Music played. Performers entertained audiences. Then came the sales pitch. And what a sales pitch it usually was. The medicine could cure headaches, back pain, stomach problems, nervous disorders, poor circulation, lack of energy, aging, insomnia, melancholy, joint pain, and apparently every other condition known to humanity. The product often sounded miraculous, because that was precisely the point. Ordinary medicines rarely attract large crowds. Miracles do. One of the most famous examples involved so-called snake oil. Today, the phrase snake oil salesman has become synonymous with fraud. Interestingly, the original story is more complicated. Traditional Chinese remedies sometimes used oil derived from certain snakes, and some preparations may actually have possessed beneficial properties. The problem emerged when opportunists borrowed the name. Many products marketed as snake oil contained no snake oil whatsoever. Some consisted mainly of mineral oil. Others contained alcohol. Some included ingredients of questionable value. The label promised miracles. The bottle delivered disappointment. A familiar theme, yet people continued buying them. Partly because the advertisements were persuasive, partly because alternatives were limited, and partly because some customers genuinely felt better afterward. Not necessarily because the medicine worked, but because expectation itself can be surprisingly powerful. The placebo effect appears throughout medical history like a recurring guest star, always present, always influential, often underestimated. Now let's talk about secret formulas. For centuries, manufacturers loved the phrase, secret formula. It sounds impressive, exclusive, mysterious, perhaps even scientific. Consumers imagined ancient knowledge, rare ingredients, and carefully guarded expertise. The reality often proved considerably less glamorous. Many secret formulas were secret for a very practical reason. If customers knew what was actually inside, sales might decline. Alcohol appeared frequently. So did sugar. Occasionally stimulants. Sometimes substances now heavily regulated. Yet the labels emphasized mystery rather than chemistry. And mystery sold remarkably well. One reason these products flourished was the absence of strong regulation. In many places, manufacturers faced few requirements. Claims could be extravagant. Evidence could be minimal. Advertisements could promise almost anything. As long as customers kept purchasing, the business model remained effective. Eventually, governments began paying closer attention. But for a long time, the marketplace resembled a competition between optimism and reality. Optimism often won the early rounds. Another fascinating chapter involves magnetic healing. Magnets captured public imagination for generations. People understood that magnets possessed unusual properties. They attracted metal. They seemed almost magical. Therefore, some entrepreneurs concluded that magnetic devices could heal the body. Magnetic bracelets appeared. Magnetic belts. Magnetic mattresses. Magnetic clothing. If an object could physically contain a magnet, someone probably tried selling it as a health product. Claims varied widely. Improved circulation, pain relief, enhanced vitality, greater strength, longer life. The evidence generally remained elusive. The advertisements remained enthusiastic. History repeatedly demonstrates that enthusiasm requires far less documentation than science. Now let's visit the world of miracle water. Every era seems to discover special water. Water from sacred springs. Water from remote mountains. Water infused with rare minerals. Water blessed by mysterious processes. Water advertised as a cure for nearly everything. Sometimes the water genuinely contained interesting minerals. Sometimes it was simply water. Consumers often reported improvements. Again, rest, relaxation, hydration, and expectation likely contributed more than marketing departments preferred to acknowledge. Yet miracle water remained enormously popular, because simple explanations often struggle to compete with magical ones. Imagine being told that better sleep and reduced stress improve your health. Reasonable advice. Now imagine being told that a hidden spring deep in the mountains contains extraordinary life-giving properties known only to a handful of experts. One explanation sounds practical. The other sounds exciting. Human beings frequently prefer exciting, even when practical turns out to be correct. Of course, not every questionable treatment involved fraud. Sometimes doctors genuinely believed in therapies that later proved ineffective. This distinction matters. A mistaken physician and a deliberate charlatan are not the same thing. History contains both. The challenge is identifying which is which. A doctor might recommend a treatment based on the best available evidence. Years later, new discoveries reveal flaws. That is science evolving. A fraud, meanwhile, continues making impossible promises regardless of evidence. The difference often becomes clearer with time. Yet during the moment itself, patients frequently struggle to tell them apart. One particularly famous category involved devices that supposedly diagnosed hidden illnesses. Inventors created elaborate machines. Needles moved. Lights flashed. Measurements appeared. The equipment looked impressive, which was often the primary objective. People tend to trust complicated machines, especially when they don't understand how the machines work. A lesson that remains surprisingly relevant. Many devices generated readings that sounded scientific. The problem was that the readings often lacked meaningful connection to actual health. Still, customers felt reassured. The machine had spoken. The machine sounded confident. And confidence remains persuasive. Perhaps the greatest irony in medical history is that many fraudulent products succeeded because they copied legitimate medicine. Real doctors used technical language. Fraudsters used technical language. Real physicians wore professional clothing. Fraudsters wore professional clothing. Real medicines occasionally produced dramatic results. Fraudsters promised dramatic results constantly. To ordinary consumers, the differences could be difficult to spot, especially when illness clouded judgment. Fortunately, the 20th century brought major changes. Regulatory agencies expanded, scientific testing improved, advertising standards strengthened. Manufacturers increasingly needed evidence, not perfect evidence, not always sufficient evidence, but far more than before. The age of effortless miracle cures gradually began to fade, not disappear entirely, just fade. Because wherever uncertainty exists, someone will always attempt to sell certainty. That seems to be one of history's most reliable business models. Yet despite all the scams, exaggerations, and false promises, something positive emerged. Public demand for effective medicine grew stronger. People wanted proof, results, evidence. The standards rose, and medicine improved because of it. Science, unlike advertising, eventually has to produce answers. So as tonight's chapter drifts into the darkness, let the medicine wagons roll out of town. Let the miracle tonics remain unopened on dusty shelves. Let the magnetic belt stop buzzing with exaggerated promises. And let the snake oil salesmen disappear beyond the horizon. They were colorful figures, entertaining figures, sometimes dishonest figures. But they were also part of a larger story. The story of humanity's endless search for health. A search filled with hope, occasional brilliance, frequent mistakes, and just enough confidence to keep the entire adventure moving forward. Meanwhile, somewhere beneath the glow of an old lantern, a salesman is still preparing to unveil a revolutionary cure guaranteed to change the world forever. A promise that history has learned to hear with a very cautious smile. Tonight, the medicine wagons have finally disappeared down the dusty road. The miracle tonics have been packed away. The snake oil salesmen are searching for their next audience. And we arrive at the final stretch of our journey through the strange history of medicine. For thousands of years, humanity searched for cures. Sometimes we found them. Sometimes we invented treatments that probably should have remained ideas. And sometimes we became so confident in those ideas that entire generations accepted them without question. Tonight we're looking at some of the deadliest medical mistakes in history. Not because doctors were malicious. Usually they weren't. Not because people were foolish. Usually they weren't. But because understanding the human body has always been extraordinarily difficult. And every generation believes it knows more than future generations will eventually discover. History suggests humility is usually the safer option. So, settle in. Get comfortable. And let's begin. One of the most fascinating patterns in medicine is how often certainty arrives before evidence. A treatment appears promising. A few success stories emerge. Experts become enthusiastic. The public becomes enthusiastic. Newspapers become enthusiastic. And suddenly everyone is convinced that a breakthrough has arrived. Then the long-term results appear. And the situation becomes considerably more complicated. We've already seen this happen with mercury, bloodletting, radium, patent medicines, lobotomies, and countless other treatments. Yet perhaps the most important lesson isn't that people made mistakes. The important lesson is how difficult those mistakes were to recognize. When everyone around you believes something works, questioning it requires courage, especially if respected authorities support it. Medical history is filled with individuals who challenged accepted wisdom. Many faced resistance. Some faced ridicule. A few changed the world. Consider the story of hand washing. Today, hand washing seems obvious. Children learn it early. Hospitals require it. Entire public health campaigns promote it. Yet there was a time when many physicians resisted the idea. In the 19th century, a Hungarian doctor named Ignaz Semmelweis noticed something troubling. Women giving birth in certain hospital wards died at much higher rates than women in others. The difference puzzled him. So he investigated. Eventually, Semmelweis concluded that doctors themselves were unknowingly transmitting disease. Physicians often moved directly from autopsies to maternity wards. Hand washing was inconsistent. The consequences proved devastating. When Semmelweis introduced hand washing procedures, death rates dropped dramatically. Today this sounds like a triumph. At the time, however, many colleagues rejected his conclusions. Some physicians felt insulted. Others remained unconvinced. The idea spread slowly, far more slowly than it should have, and countless lives might have been saved had the evidence been accepted sooner. It remains one of the most sobering examples in medical history. Sometimes the simplest solution faces the greatest resistance. Now let's talk about vaccines. Few medical developments have saved more lives. Yet the early history of vaccination was not without controversy. Before modern vaccines existed, diseases such as smallpox terrified entire populations. Outbreaks killed millions. Survivors often carried lifelong scars. Communities lived in constant fear of recurrence. Then came one of medicine's most important breakthroughs. Edward Jenner observed that milkmaids who contracted cowpox appeared protected against smallpox. His experiments helped establish vaccination. The results eventually transformed public health. But early adoption was not universal. Many people viewed the idea with suspicion. Some feared side effects. Others distrusted the science. Still others objected for philosophical or religious reasons. The pattern feels surprisingly familiar. History demonstrates that revolutionary medical advances often face skepticism before acceptance. Yet over time, evidence accumulated. The benefits became undeniable. And vaccination became one of humanity's most powerful tools against disease. Not every experiment ended so successfully. Some produced tragedy. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, researchers occasionally pushed ethical boundaries. Standards we now consider essential simply did not exist. Consent procedures were inconsistent. Oversight was limited. The desire for knowledge sometimes overshadowed concern for participants. Many lessons were learned at terrible cost. These episodes eventually contributed to stronger ethical protections. Modern medical research operates under rules shaped by those painful experiences. Rules written partly in response to past mistakes. And that may be one of history's most important themes. Progress often emerges from failure. Not because failure is desirable, but because people learn from it. Sometimes reluctantly, sometimes slowly, but eventually. Now let's revisit a familiar character from our story, the confident physician. Medical history contains many brilliant doctors. It also contains many confident doctors. These categories overlap, but not always. A physician armed with incomplete knowledge can still sound remarkably convincing. Patients naturally trust expertise. Societies depend upon expertise. The challenge lies in ensuring expertise remains connected to evidence. Whenever that connection weakens, problems emerge. This was true in ancient Egypt, true in medieval Europe, true during the age of patent medicines, and true in every era since. Science works best when it remains willing to question itself. The moment questioning stops, progress slows. One reason modern medicine has achieved extraordinary success is that it constantly tests its own assumptions. Treatments are studied. Data is collected. Results are challenged. Peer review exists. Clinical trials exist. None of these systems are perfect. Human institutions rarely are, but they provide safeguards that earlier generations lacked. Imagine explaining modern medicine to a physician from 500 years ago. Antibiotics, vaccines, medical imaging, organ transplantation, genetic testing, anesthesia, intensive care units. The list would sound miraculous. Yet each breakthrough emerged through years of observation, experimentation, correction, and refinement. Not magic. Not secret formulas. Not miracle tonics. Evidence. Repeated evidence. And perhaps that is the true hero of our story. Not any individual doctor. Not any single discovery. But the process itself. The willingness to ask questions. To test assumptions. To admit mistakes. To revise conclusions. That process transformed medicine more than any single cure ever could. Of course, this doesn't mean modern medicine is finished. Far from it. Future generations will almost certainly look back at some current practices with surprise, perhaps even disbelief. Every era contains blind spots. Every generation inherits unanswered questions. Medical science continues evolving because the search for knowledge never truly ends. There are still diseases we struggle to cure. Still mysteries we don't fully understand. Still discoveries waiting somewhere beyond the horizon. And that is precisely what makes the history of medicine so fascinating. It is not merely a story of errors, nor merely a story of triumphs. It is a story of people. People trying to relieve suffering. People searching for answers. People working with limited information and doing the best they could. Sometimes succeeding brilliantly, sometimes failing dramatically, usually somewhere in between. And through that long process, humanity gradually moved from bloodletting and mercury tonics toward a deeper understanding of health and disease. The journey was slow, messy, occasionally alarming, but undeniably extraordinary. So as our story finally draws to a close, let the ancient physicians return to their scrolls. Let the plague doctors disappear into the fog. Let the alchemists extinguish their furnaces. Let the patent medicine wagons roll into history. And let the hospital corridors grow quiet for the night. For thousands of years, humanity searched for cures in every corner of the world. In herbs and minerals. In rituals and theories. In experiments and observations. Some searches led nowhere. Others changed civilization. Together they created one of the most remarkable stories ever told. The story of medicine itself. A story filled with strange ideas, unexpected discoveries, dangerous mistakes, and countless individuals who refused to stop searching for answers, even when those answers seemed impossibly far away. And somewhere, beyond the edge of history, another generation is already beginning the next chapter, hopefully with considerably less mercury, and certainly with much better hand washing. Good night.